Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you an unhaul. So I've got quite a few books that are going to be going here, and I'm going to dive right in with starting with the DNFs because that's something I don't talk about on my channel, and you might be curious to see which books I've decided I am not going to continue reading and why. Let's get right down to the books that will be leaving my shelves. So the first books that I'll be leaving my shelves are Witches Steeped in Gold, this stunning fairy loot edition, and also Empress Crowned in Red. I gave these a chance. Well, actually, you gave this one a chance, but I tried. I tried to read it. I read the first 50 to 100 pages and it just was not working for me. I found it was very info dumpy. I was not getting a firm grip on the world. I was not getting a firm grip on the characters. Witchy books often don't work for me. I do need to stop saying that because I've now found a few witchy books that I do like, but this, and also one of my favorite series ever, is a witchy book, but this particular witchy book did not work for me. I was really looking forward to getting into a kind of Jamaican witchy kind of book, but it just wasn't working for me, and I wasn't willing to give it the time of day that a big fantasy book demands. So I'm going to be unfortunately letting go of both of these books from my shelves. Another two books that I really was looking forward to reading but unfortunately didn't work for me is Bullet Train and also Three Assassins by Kotaro, Isaka. And Bullet Train recently got a film adaptation that people seem to really like, so I think people know what these books are about more or less now, but it's set on this train where people are trying to kill each other for whatever reason, and I read the first 50 pages of this and I did not like it. I couldn't stand it. I thought it was just the way it was written I really didn't like. There was so many commas in the sentences, it really bothered me, and they were comma splices, and that is my pet peeve. My grammatical pet peeve are comma splices. It's very specific. I really hate them, and I just could not get through how many there were in this book. I don't know if that's down to translation or whatever. It just was not my style of book to read. And then that aside, I love the idea of reading about assassins. One of my favorite series ever that I unfortunately can't really talk about because of the author has a lot to do with assassins, and I love it. So anything with that in there I'm quite curious to try, but it felt so random. The characters felt so random, and it was the kind of randomness that I just don't enjoy reading about and getting behind in my books. I did even try to switch to audiobook. I was so determined to love this book and get my way through it, and I switched to audiobook, and even then I DNF'd the audiobook as well because I just didn't care. I didn't have any investment in the story. I was not interested, and so unfortunately I will not be reading this book, and I will not be reading its sequel because they just were not it. Another DNF, which I DNF'd 25% of the way in, so I read a full quarter of it, is Inferno by Dante. I was in the mood for a classic, and this was not the classic that I wanted it to be. It was very much a mixture of Pilgrims. It felt like it was trying to be Pilgrim's Progress, where they go on a journey and the journey has a lot to do with good and bad and morals, and they meet all of these different encounters and characters that will help them along their journey. But it was so dry, and it was so boring. It's written in verse, that kind of old in verse that you get in books like Paradise Lost, which is a book which kind of did this style of writing and this style of religious imagery in stories so much better. I would recommend Paradise Lost, but this itself was so dry and so boring that after reading a quarter of it, I thought I could very well read the rest of it and get through it, but why would I do that when I'm bored out of my mind? I read half of The Stranded by Sarah Daniels. This is a young adult dystopian book that's set on a ship. I historically don't do well with books set on boats. Often they have to do with pirates, so I thought maybe if it was something sci-fi related it might be different, but it still was very much the case. I don't actually think this book particularly did anything wrong. I liked the world building, I liked the concept, the characters were fine, the storyline was fine, but I was just reading it and I was halfway through and I already knew that the rating would be a 3-star rating. I knew that I would find this book mediocre, and it's not short. It's like 400 pages, and even though 400 pages is not long, I just thought, did I really want to read another 200 pages where I feel fine about everything? And the answer is no. So even though it's a very interesting book and I loved the inside pages of the paperback because it looks like a ship itself and like has a It was good, okay? It was good. It was doing a good job, but it wasn't doing a good enough job for me, and I think somebody else is going to really read this and enjoy it. I also haven't really enjoyed young adult dystopian for a while now as much as I used to as a teenager, so maybe it's just me not really vibing with the genre. Maybe it's this book. I haven't read enough of it lately to tell, but it just wasn't there for me. I read A Quarter of Loki, A Bad God's Guide to Taking the Blame by Louie Stowell, and I DNF'd it. So I read this one, and it's basically Diary of a Wimpy Kid, but Loki and Thor are in human bodies as children. So it wasn't for me. I don't like Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I don't like that kind of style of story, and it wasn't working for me, and so I let it go. I let it go. Even though I do like Greek mythology, and it was kind of playful with the illustrations, very Diary Wimpy of a Kid-esque. I think children are gonna like this. I think I'm not gonna like it. I read the first 50 pages of Ellie Pillai is Brown, which is on the Jalak Prize long list for young adult books, and I DNF'd it after 50 pages. I really couldn't get into this book. I just thought it was so crammed with trying to talk about topics, and I love when young adult talks about important themes, and I love when young adult talks about certain topics, but 50 pages in I probably already knew about 3 racist encounters that this main character has had as a teenager. I knew nothing about her personality other than she liked music. 0. And I think that's a problem in a book. When you start it, you want to get introduced either to the world or to the characters. It's set in contemporary world, so in 50 pages you've got to let me know something about the main character. And a main character, a person of color, does not get personality ascribed to them by the racial experiences that they have. That does not build someone's personality. So me knowing 3 of their racial experiences but nothing about what they like and don't like does not personality build. And so I got really frustrated and angry that that was happening, and that it was just cramming in all of these social injustices without introducing me to any characters, so I didn't have a reason to care. I don't think that's really the way to write about these subjects, and it did not work for me. Also, there were a lot of pop culture references because our main character likes music, so music really frames the story. Music is very heavily involved, but it was a bit too heavily involved for me. That's too much. I don't mind a good pop culture reference here and there. I don't mind even a few of them, but for this it was just crammed. It was crammed with social injustice. It was crammed with music references. It was too much. And the last books that I've DNF'd since my last unhaul was The Reluctant Vampire Queen by Jo Simmons. This is like a young adult vampire book, and I love vampire books, so I was looking forward to this, but this felt particularly juvenile for the age of our characters. So she is just this normal human who's living her life, and this vampire pops out of the bush and says, I want to make you my vampire queen. Do you agree? And she kind of is trying to be a bit edgy. She's like, I don't want to, I'm a bit reluctant about it. It's literally the title. She's a reluctant vampire queen, but the way that she deals with this, the way she kind of easily absorbs the fact that vampires exist, and the way she's like, vampires need to be more feminist, and it just felt all very contrived. It just didn't feel natural. It didn't feel believable. It didn't feel natural, and it was kind of going for a humour that wasn't particularly funny to me. It didn't work. The vampires felt very what's the word for when the vampires feel fake? Vampires felt like a parody of themselves. I just didn't like our main character because she seemed a bit juvenile and ridiculous, and it just wasn't the depth of the story I need for my vampires to have. Apparently vampires have depth to them. Now we get to some books that I've actually already read, but I'm unhauling anyway. So first of all, I'm unhauling Brit-ish by Afua Hirsch. I read this one recently in February, I think, and I really enjoyed this. I really recommend it. I'm only unhauling it because I picked it up in a secondhand bookshop because I was unsure whether I would like it or not, and sometimes I do that. I pick up my books secondhand, and if I like them, I unhaul my secondhand copy and get myself a nice shiny new copy. I know that Abby from Abbey of Pelennor wants to read this, so I'm going to pass this along to her, and I'm looking forward to when I can get my own copy because I learned a lot from this book. I saw myself in this book, and I actually also think it's a very important book to recommend to others, so I'm glad I get to pass it along. A book I read and thought was okay but did not love is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. This is a book that has so much hype around it, and I'm glad that I finally read it. It was one of the oldest books on my TBR, and I can understand why, because I'm not someone who traditionally really enjoys a good thriller, and this was a solid thriller, but it wasn't my favourite. I think it was too long, and I'm not going to continue the series. I have to say I'm proud of myself because so many times I've seen the full set of this series in secondhand shops, and I always wanted to get it because I was like, I've got the first one, what if I love it and I should continue the series and I want the next one right then and there, but I told myself, don't get it because you need to read the first one and know what you think before you can find the rest of them. And I'm glad I did that because I'm glad I didn't buy the rest of them. I'm glad I waited and patient because I don't want to continue the series. I had a good time with it. I think I'm going to watch the film. It's got Daniel Craig in it and I'm sure I might enjoy it more. I read The Last White Man by Mohsin Hamid. I was very excited for this after having enjoyed Exit West by this author, but unfortunately this wasn't it for me. I found it to be a really big disappointment. It's got a really unique and interesting concept of what if white people slowly started turning brown or black, so everyone is gradually becoming a person of colour. What would happen then? And apparently, according to this, not too much will happen. And I just found it to really focus on like a romantic relationship and not really on the concept itself, and then unpicking that in detail. And so that's not what I wanted from this book. It didn't serve what the synopsis said it was going to give me. I'm unhauling The House of Fortune by Jessie Burton. Please rest assured that The Miniaturist is staying on my shelf. I really enjoyed The Miniaturist and this is the sequel. It's a proof copy. I didn't think the book necessarily needed a sequel. This was written like 10 years after, so it's a very extended period for a sequel to come. I'm not saying that this was badly written or anything. Jessie Burton knows how to write. I don't think she particularly writes black characters in an authentic way. I wouldn't say that she writes them in a problematic way. They just didn't scream as very alive and realistic to me in this book. I also feel like even though it was good and had a nice ending, I don't think it blew my mind by any respect, and it wasn't as good as the first one, so I don't need to keep my hold on it, and I'm going to pretend like the first one is a standalone still. I'm also unhauling How to Train Your Dragon by Cressida Cowell. I'm glad that I got the opportunity to read this, so thank you Hannah for unhauling it to me. I thought it was good fun. I didn't love it. I didn't like it nearly as much as the films in the slightest, and so passing this along to my secondhand bookshop where other children can pick it up, because I know it's a very popular series that a lot of children love, is a much better place for this book to be. I'm also unhauling Luster by Raven Leilani. This is one that I read in March and I didn't like it at all. I thought the writing style was really bad, so kind of similar to Kotaro Isaka. It just didn't click for me. It's got a very crude sense of writing and it felt random in places, which is not something I can get along with well. And even though the story itself, the concept of a young black woman dating this older white man who's in an open marriage and then kind of ending up in their household where these two white people are raising a black child, I thought, wow, that's so interesting. I just wish anybody else had written it, because the way that this was written with that crudeness to it and that undertone just did not work for me. So it was short and easy to get through, and I switched to audiobook to help me along, but I'm also going to just be passing it along. I'm unhauling Becky by Sarah May. This was a really tough decision for me because I read this one in March and I felt mixed about it, and I didn't like some elements of the story, but I think it did have other redeeming elements to it. It is a retelling of Vanity Fair, so I was wondering if I should keep this one until I'd read Vanity Fair so that I can reread it again. But I do have a finished copy and a proof copy, and I did like the cover on the proof copy more, so I'm holding on to my proof copy for the time being, seeing if I have interest in reading Vanity Fair. But for the time being, I heard that Hannah from Lada M did want to read this, and if I give it to her, it contributes to a TBR challenge, so that was extra motivation for me to pass this along to her. We have Milk by Alice Kinsella. This is another one that I read in March and I thought it was just okay. I did think I learned some things and gained some insight from this motherhood memoir, but I also didn't particularly like the structure of it, and that structure that the book had kind of barred me from really getting deep into it. So I think it's one that I can just pass along. I don't need to hold on to. I'm also passing along my copy of Ghosted by Emily Barr. It is signed specifically to me, but I hope that is okay for whoever gets it next. I did like this and I had a very good time reading it. I love a good time loop story, and this does the time loop really well, and I do like reading young adult murder mysteries and thrillers. I do have a good time with them. I think they're a lot of fun, even though I think the last 25% of them often disappoints me, and this last resolvement of the situation did disappoint me too. I do have a good time reading them. I have a good experience. So actually deciding to unhaul this one was not easy, because I have fond memories of the time loop and I have fond memories of solving the case. I was wondering if I would reread it at some point, but ultimately I just think I need to let it go. I do tend to like hold on to books and then like later let them go, and I'm trying to do that, let go of them sooner, so they have less, they're taking up less room on my shelves. So here we have About a Boy by Nick Hornby. I got this in a secondhand shop because I was interested in it, but I don't think this style of story is really for me anymore. It's just so not me. That's all I can really say. It's down to genre and type of book. The books that fall into like Me Before You, The Curious Incident of the Night Dog in the Nighttime, Us by David Nichols, those kind of books. That's what this felt like when I started it in my try a chapter experience that I did. It's not a video, I just did it for myself, and I just, yeah, I wasn't vibing with it. I'm gonna put it back in the secondhand bookshelf. I also started reading Letters to Milena by Kafka, and I'm not actually saying that this is a DNF, okay, because I read 2 letters and I realised that as much as I love Kafka's books, as much as I like any author's books, I have no interest in reading their letters. And I know that publishing the letters of a classic author is quite something that people tend to do, and it can give you insight into the author, but I've always been someone who does not like I don't care about the author, and I think it's very different when it's contemporary and what the author does has impact on the way that people live their lives in society. I think there's some merit to those conversations, but classic authors, authors who have passed away, I don't actually care about them. I don't want to know more about them. I love Shakespeare. I've got no interest in Shakespeare the man. I love Kafka's books. I have no interest in Kafka the man. I just want to know like the general information that's nice to know about an author, like whether they were a good person or not, and that's it. So I don't really care about reading these letters. I don't really care about reading the letters of Sylvia Plath as much as I adore and love Ariel by Sylvia Plath. I just don't think it's something that contributes to my reading life, and so I've also DNF'd from my Kindle, not DNF'd, I've also unhauled from my Kindle the letters of Sylvia Plath because I just don't have interest in reading them. I'm also unhauling Haven by Emma Donoghue. This is a book that I read and thought was really bad. I didn't like it. I think it was boring. I think it was dry. I think the outcome and ending was not satisfying. And after reading The Genius That Is Room by Emma Donoghue, I was quite shocked that this could be something else that she could produce. I will be reading more Emma Donoghue in the future because I enjoyed Room so much that I think a third chance is worthy of this author, but I just thought this was not it. I'm unhauling The Muse by Jessie Burton. So I read The Miniaturist, and I also read something else, The Confession, which continues to be my favourite Jessie Burton, and because I read those 2 back to back and really enjoyed them, I thought I just wanted to read all of Jessie Burton's books gradually. But my mind has changed. I'm not in that position anymore. I don't think I need to read all of Jessie Burton's books, and after reading The House of Fortune, which I unhauled earlier on in this unhaul, I realised that I don't love the way she writes people of colour, even though I don't think she writes them badly, I just don't love it. And in this one, our main character is speaking in Patois, I think. And I just don't really want to read this woman's experience of writing Patois. I think it would make me uncomfortable. So I'm letting go of this one, and I think, I'm not saying I'm never going to read a Jessie Burton book. I think if she does a concept that interests me enough, I would, and I'm impressed because Jessie Burton got me reading more historical fiction, which is something I didn't really do that much recently. When I say recently, I mean the last 2 years I've started to read it more again. So Jessie Burton made some waves in my reading life, but this is just let it go. I'm also unhauling Unread, The Story of Stuff by Annie Leonard. So this is how our obsession with stuff is trashing the planet, our communities and our health, and a vision for change, which is the part that really interested me here, and a vision for change. I got this book initially when I was doing a video where I read my best friend's favourite books to kind of surprise her as part of her birthday present, seeing as we don't live in the same country anymore, and you know, you need to get creative with birthday presents then, and I thought it would be nice. I did not get around to this one. I read a different one. I didn't read as many books as I hoped to for that vlog, but that is okay. It had a time limit. So this is one of Yana's favourite, or was one of Yana's favourite non-fiction books at the time when I made that video, and I'm going to give it to her. I am going to give it to her. I wanted to read it myself because I'm quite interested in consumerism and stuff, and Yana is very interested in zero waste, and she does a very good job of that, and it's kind of trickled into my own lifestyle. I've tried to reduce my waste, I've tried to make better choices for our environment, and that's the influence of a really good friend. But I don't think I'm going to read this very soon, and I'm quite happy with where I've made my progress in reading around this subject to not particularly want to prioritise this one. So I'm going to give it to Yana. She's going to like it. My TBR challenge, I've hauled a lot in the month that I'm filming this. I'm trying to balance it out by letting go of some books unread on my shelves that I don't think I'm going to prioritise anytime soon. Also, the good thing about giving it to my best friend is that if I do want to read it in future, I can borrow it from her. Yana's not like me, she's not as possessive as her books. Anyway, Joan Didion. So this is We Tell Ourselves Stories in Order to Live by Joan Didion. This is a bind-up collection of her non-fiction works. I feel really guilty because this is a birthday present for my sisters, and I really, really wanted it at the time. now I don't want it. I read The Year of Magical Thinking and I thought I was going to be a Joan Didion girly, and I'm not a Joan Didion girly. Reading The Year of Magical Fiction was an exception because it's a memoir that has to do with grief, and that is basically my wheelhouse. So of course I love that book. But then I read, what did I read? I read something from this collection. I read Slouching Towards Bethlehem and I thought it was okay, and I started to read the next essay collection of Joan Didion's from this and I was just like, it's okay. And I have a feeling a lot of them are going to be okay in this bind up. The only one in this bind up that I'm interested in reading now is After Henry, which is kind of like, it's not the sequel to The Year of Magical Thinking, but it's about after your husband has died, what comes next. And again, that sounds like something I'd be interested in. I'd be happy to read that Joan Didion book. I don't need to keep the whole bind up for that. And as I said, I got a TBR challenge, and in looking through the oldest 100 books on my shelf that I own, I was like, this one doesn't need to stay. And then last but not least, I'm unhauling The Keeper by Tanariva Due and also Stephen Barnes, illustrated by Marco Finnegan. I read this one recently and I didn't really like it. I think I read it in February. It's a graphic novel that promises to be Afrofuturist horror. I didn't find it particularly Afrofuturist enough for me. I didn't find it particularly horrifying enough for me, and I found the artwork quite mediocre. So with all of that conclusion, you can see why I don't really want to keep this. I usually hold onto my graphic novels. They're expensive. This was a Christmas gift, but books are made to be read and passed around. They do not have to stay with you to have been a good gift. And so I'm glad I got the opportunity to read this. I did really want to try it, but it didn't work for me, so I'm gonna let it go. And there you have it. Those are all of the books that are leaving my shelf. I've not particularly been in an unhauling mood lately, so I'm actually proud of how many books are here. Please let me know in the comment section down below, what was the last book that you unhauled, or if you don't unhaul, what was the last book you didn't enjoy reading. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!